the muted reaction, that, as Matt Egan was saying, and it's muted compared to other sell-offs that we'd seen earlier in the year. The S&P tells the story. The S&P fell in April after Donald Trump unveiled the reciprocal tariffs. A few days later, he backed off, and then we had the huge rally. Same thing happened with China. The president eased, the market jumped. So today's muted reaction could be because of what the Financial Times calls the TACO factor. It stands for Trump always chickens out. It's the idea that the president never really follows through with his economic threats. Stephen Englander is the global head of G10 FX Research, North American macro strategy. The problem, Stephen, is just when you think you might actually be on the winning side by guessing that he chickens out, he might not. That's really the risk, isn't it?
Indeed it is, although it, even before they pulled back on the 145% tariffs, they were putting in exemptions to make sure that the impact wasn't as dire as the worst projections were there. So, his fans say that there's method in his madness. His detractors say there's madness in his method. They are collecting a lot of revenues, which I think, is very important for them for the tax bill that's coming up.
You say they're collecting a lot of revenues, but I saw the numbers on the first month. It was, about 17 billion, which is not small, I'll grant you, but it's nowhere near the 600 billion. I mean, annualized out, it's nowhere near the 600 billion that they have forecast in revenues that they could be bringing in. And you know better than I do that you do end up with substitution and consumer substituting goods when something is tariffed.
Indeed, I do, but since the numbers for May, including the big collection day, just came out, the May run rate is three times what it was last year. So it's not going to be 600 billion, but it could be somewhere between 250 and 300 billion that they're collecting. It doesn't solve the fiscal problem, but it certainly gets them a certain distance towards it. And the May numbers relative to May 2024 were significantly better than the April numbers were relative to April 2024.
Is it your feeling that on both of these, the tariffs on smartphones and the tariffs on the EU ever come to fruition, or do they get negotiated away with some quasi-deal, like the UK deal, which sort of looks like one thing, but actually probably doesn't hold a great deal of water?
Well, I'll comment on the EU. I'm not going to say anything that applies to specific companies. The EU thing, I think it would be like China, that if they were implemented, there'd be a couple of days of panic and then both sides would pull back. I think that there are issues that the US legitimately has with the EU. The EU doesn't even have free trade within itself. Never mind, kind of the sort of free trade with the US. And there are non-tariff barriers. It seems like they use selective taxation to, on US service companies. There is something to discuss. And I think the issue that he is bringing up today is that the EU offers are pretty minimal. They said free trade in goods, that's not the issue. What about free trade in agriculture? What about getting rid of, healthcare restrictions, which seems to limit US exports to Europe?
I'm glad you mentioned all of those non-tariff barriers, if you like, because they are the difficult bit in the negotiations, aren't they? Anybody can just come up with a, let's reduce tariffs by 20% and a headline number. But the reason these talks are going nowhere, in the president's words, is that it's really tricky stuff, and it's the stuff people have been fighting over for years.
You're right. And, I think that it would, in the best of all worlds, this would be a long negotiation that would, end up with non-tariff barriers on both sides being reduced. The history is that nothing much happens, I think he's trying to accelerate it. You can debate the wisdom. As you said earlier, 50% tariffs don't look like they're going to be a good idea. We import more from Europe than we do from China. So there would be tremendous disruption, but would be disruption on both sides. I think he's trying to motivate them to move closer towards, giving
Right.
an offer that they would consider to be, reasonable or debatable.
I'm grateful, sir. Stephen, thank you very much. Have a good weekend and a good holiday weekend too. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.